Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing another video for my What Is series. If you don't know what my What Is series is about, it is pretty much talking about mental health issues or mental health treatments or anything really to do with mental health, and kind of just giving information. And pretty much a lot of my information comes off the NHS website, but sometimes I know that it is easier to listen to it rather than having to read all of it. Plus, I have already gone through the NHS website and what they have defined as PTSD for this particular video, and I have picked out the main bits that I think are really, really important. But I will leave the link to this document down below so you can go and read the whole thing if you feel that that is kind of going to be of benefit to you. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about PTSD in general, and then I'm going to be kind of moving on to the causes, the symptoms, and treatments for PTSD. The next part of the video will then be about complex PTSD and then just about misconceptions in general. So an overview of PTSD. PTSD, as described by the NHS, is when somebody has a traumatic event. Now, a traumatic event doesn't always have to be traumatic in general. Like, some people may think, oh, if you have a major health issue or something, that's not traumatic. But other people may have the same health issue but find it traumatic mentally. And it doesn't matter whether it is listed within this video or listed anywhere as a traumatic event. If you find it traumatic, then it's traumatic, regardless of whether somebody else or your neighbor or your friend finds it traumatic. If you find it traumatic, it is traumatic. Don't deny yourself your feelings if you're feeling that something has happened to you and you're feeling it's traumatic. So yeah. So what kind of made me want to do this video is because when I was 17/18, I was sexually abused by a man who was over 3 times my age. And if you would like to see that video, then please head over to my channel to go and find it, or you can click on the card that is going to be above, on the top of the screen now, and you can kind of get a brush over of what happened. In that video, it is a brush over. I haven't really gone into detail about exactly what happened because I don't feel I'm ready for that. I think that, once I've done a bit more healing myself, I will probably be able to talk about it fully, raising awareness for the fact that it's not just friends and family, it's not just somebody you know, although they do say the majority of times it is. But actually, PTSD isn't just all about sexual abuse. PTSD can be anything. And as I said before, it's anything that you find traumatic can cause these PTSD symptoms. Causes of post-traumatic stress disorder, as defined by the NHS, these can include serious road accidents, violent personal assaults, such as sexual assault, mugging or robbery, serious health problems and childbirth experiences. But obviously that list is not exhaustive, and as I said before, if you find it traumatic, it can cause PTSD. Don't deny yourself your feelings. So in terms of when PTSD can develop, so PTSD can develop immediately after the incident, or it could even be days, weeks, months, or even years after you've had the traumatic event. Now, when I read about the fact that it could be years, I got a bit shocked because I was like, years? But I believe the NHS sort of thing. I believe what's written down, but I suppose it kind of shocked me that somebody could go years not thinking about their traumatic experience and not thinking it's traumatic. PTSD is also known to affect 1 in every 3 people that experience a traumatic event. So I have done a pie chart. I have been super organized and done a pie chart. So I will put it up here, but basically it kind of describes to you how 1/3 of people who have a traumatic event will develop PTSD, and it will become life-limiting PTSD, and they'll need treatment for it, or they'll need support to be able to process and recover from it. So actually I found that quite interesting in a way because I didn't realise it was that common. So now in this part of the video, I'm going to be talking about symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to be reading off the NHS website and just kind of covering the topics briefly because there is actually a lot of material in terms of PTSD, which is good, But at the same time, I don't want to make this video super, super long. So I'm going to just do the main bits that I have noticed within the PTSD information. So one of the symptoms they talk about is re-experiencing. So basically, re-experiencing is when you think about the traumatic event again. And this may come in the form of flashbacks, nightmares, repetitive and distressing images or sensations, physical sensations such as pain, sweating, feeling sick, or trembling. So things like having panic attacks and having flashbacks at the same time of thinking of what has happened to you and how horrible it was and how much it hurt or affected you. Like, that can actually just be a part of re-experiencing. Like, I definitely suffered the re-experiencing. I had flashbacks, I had nightmares, and I had the physical side of it where I would have a massive panic attack because I was having the flashbacks or the nightmares. It would wake me up at night. I would have massive, just not being able to function because I would have at least one panic attack a day. And that was really kind of life limiting. The next one they talk about is avoidance and emotional numbing. So for some people who experience PTSD, they avoid places or people who actually have been around when the trauma happened. So say, for example, you met somebody at a pub. You might not want to go back to that pub ever, and you might not want to speak to any of those people who actually were there and you met at the pub because you were with the other person. For me, I met my abuser at an amateur dramatics group. For me, I met my sexual abuser at an amateur dramatics group, and I just don't want to go back to that particular group. I really hate going, and I went there for a little while after I had the trauma, but I kind of didn't feel safe because I knew that he could potentially come there, if that makes sense. So I went for 1 or 2 sessions after that the trauma of everything was out. And although they did their best to kind of support me and everything, they basically barred him from the club and they said that he couldn't come into the hall when he knew that basically we were having rehearsals and stuff, and basically tried to make it as kind of comforting for me as possible. But I suppose the thing is with sexual abuse, you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to ask the other person, are they okay? And that is probably one of the biggest things that I almost wanted when it all came out and everyone knew about it. I wanted someone to ask if I was okay, if I was coping, or if I was, able to kind of, whether I was being affected by it, support. And I think that's one of the things I did want. But I think most people assume that the person wouldn't want that. So I think just finding out what that person wants and doesn't want after a traumatic experience is really important. So some people who have had a traumatic experience may become kind of distant and isolate themselves because they just don't want it to happen again. And they fear other people. They have that they get the anxiety of being around different people. I know with me, I would go out, but if I saw a man, or if I saw a man that looked like my abuser, even if it wasn't, if he looked like my abuser, I would be so scared. I would literally just have to blast my music and turn the other way as I wasn't looking at that person. And that person probably thought, why is this girl being so ignorant, or why is this girl being like this? But actually, I was doing it because I was being reminded of my abuser. And it happened to me a couple of times, actually, because, I don't know, he must have had a very recognisable face. I don't know. Not wanting to see people, basically, that have look like that person, or even just features, or even just, I don't know, even just anything. I used to kind of always look at the driver when I saw the vehicle that he used to drive. So the vehicle that he used to drive was a little white van, and whenever I saw a little white van that was that make and that model, I would look at the driver to make sure it wasn't him, because I was always on edge, almost as if whether he was following me or whether he was keeping taps on where I was or anything. And I just was scared that he was going to want to continue the abuse. And I suppose I was lucky in a way that he didn't want to continue it, and he didn't, after the police were involved and stuff like that, he just removed himself from my life. So another symptom of PTSD, which is quite common, is hyperarousal. Now, hyperarousal is not necessarily what you would think, as in sexual. It's not necessarily that. It can just be on edge all the time, feeling on edge and feeling almost constantly I don't know, for me, I had that. But my hyperarousal came in the part, if someone was to walk in the room, I would literally go like that, and I would be so conscious of anyone walking in the room, anyone going out of the room, or anything. And I would literally be so conscious about anyone else that was near me, and I just hated that because it was exhausting. It was exhausting trying to always be aware of your surroundings, and actually it has even led me to be super kind of vigilant with like surroundings now, even though I can have someone walk in the room now and I wouldn't care. I would like probably just glance and see who it was, but I wouldn't almost turn my head very, very violently to make sure it wasn't the person that I hated and the person that had hurt me, you know? But the way that the NHS describes it is hyperarousal often leads to irritability, angry outbursts, sleeping problems, such as insomnia, and difficulty concentrating. So, yeah, I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, to be honest, I definitely did have the difficulty concentrating because I'd be doing something, someone would walk in the room and I would like be on edge, and I would always be like checking who it was that was coming in the room. And if the room had a lot of hustle and bustle, that would be quite a lot, and I wouldn't get a lot done because I wouldn't be able to concentrate on the task at hand if I was always conscious and worrying about who was going to walk in the room, basically. So other problems that might come as a result of having a traumatic experience and come alongside PTSD are things like depression, anxiety, phobias, self-harming or destructive behaviours such as alcohol misuse, drug misuse, or even like cutting and self-harming like physically with like on your body. Also, some people with PTSD suffer like physical symptoms. So physical symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, chest pain, stomach aches, like it can be anything. Like PTSD affects different people differently, and don't think just because you're not having the flashbacks or just because you're not having the hyperarousal, don't think that you're not suffering because you've had a traumatic experience, you think it's traumatic, therefore you should get help for that, because it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter whether they think it's a traumatic experience or not, because what you feel is how you feel, and what they feel is how they feel. But at the end of the day, you need to get help for what you're struggling with. So if you think you might have PTSD and you need help, go to your GP, go to your care practitioner or whoever, because I know in the UK it's GPs, but in other countries it might be something completely different. So go to somebody who you know is your first line of help and discuss what you're feeling, discuss how it's affecting you, and hopefully they'll be able to bring up some suggestions on how to kind of help you with any of the struggles you're experiencing. So now I'm going to go ahead and we'll briefly talk about treatments that you may have if you are diagnosed or if they recognise you have symptoms of PTSD. So two of the ones I'm going to talk about, obviously there probably is loads more, but two of the ones I'm going to talk about is trauma-based CBT and EMDR. So trauma-based CBT stands for trauma-based cognitive behavioural therapy. Now, it works for some people. It doesn't always work for others. So it kind of just depends as to what your care practitioner thinks is going to help you. But CBT can be used in general. But when it's trauma-focused, it is focusing on the trauma you've experienced and helping you to kind of cognitively and behaviourally work out what has happened and kind of deal with the trauma, if that makes sense. The other way to treat PTSD is eye movement desensitization reprocessing therapy. It is a really big mouthful, but basically it stands for EMDR, and I had that. So if you'd like me to do a video about explaining in depth what EMDR is and how you do it and how my experience was about it, then please leave a like and a comment down below, because hopefully I will be able to do something like that. I think that would be a really interesting video, and I will put it under the What Is series, but it will be something like what is EMDR, and then I'll explain everything about it, because I have experienced having the treatment for trauma, and I had the EMDR therapy. So if you'd like me to go into more detail about that therapy, then please let me know. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and talk about complex PTSD. So talking about the difference between having PTSD and how it bridges into then having complex PTSD. So complex, as you would think, means that it's complex. It's not just a straightforward diagnosis of PTSD. It has more elements to it. So complex PTSD usually occurs when somebody has had either multiple experiences of trauma, or they have experienced trauma in their early childhood when they're still developing, and it has affected their development and their behaviour as they've developed because the trauma was done, say, when they were really, really young, basically. So other symptoms on top of the symptoms mentioned for PTSD, for complex PTSD, they say that you could have feelings of shame or guilt, difficulty controlling your emotions, periods of losing attention and concentration, which is also known as dissociation, physical symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, chest pains, and stomach aches, cutting yourself off from friends and family, relationship difficulties, destructive or risky behaviour such as self-harm, alcohol misuse, drug abuse, and feeling suicidal. So all of those things are things that could mask another condition. So, for example, you could be diagnosed with, I don't know, a personality disorder because you've tried to kill yourself, or you've self-harmed or something, but actually you might be doing that because you've got complex PTSD. So that's why I think complex PTSD isn't diagnosed as often as it should be, because some of the additional symptoms for PTSD, for the complex one, kind of mask other conditions, or they mimic other conditions. So I think sometimes, it is as well. Mental health is a complete like it is down to opinions at the end of the day, because one psychiatrist might say, "Oh yeah, you have complex PTSD," and another psychiatrist might turn around and say, "No, you have PTSD and a personality disorder," and it just. Yeah, it's down to a lot about opinion, but definitely bring the whole complex PTSD up if you think that is a potential for what you might have. So one of the main differences that they do talk about with complex PTSD is that adults with complex PTSD will lose their trust in people and feel separated from others. So actually they just find it hard to make those friendships, find it hard to trust other people because they're scared of being hurt again, pretty much. And that can happen with PTSD as well, but it's one of the big things that the NHS kind of talks about. It also talks about if a child is interrupted in their development, so for example, the trauma happens in the development stages of a child, then it can affect their behaviour, their self-confidence, and it can basically just alter how they would have been if they hadn't experienced the trauma, basically. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and talk about some of the misconceptions associated with PTSD. So some of these are my own misconceptions that I want to just stomp out and talk about, but some of them are misconceptions that have been sort of just in general mentioned to me either by friends or they have been submitted on my Instagram. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, please go ahead and follow me, because I do post things on my story about like the question boxes where you can submit a question or an answer. So please go and follow me on my Instagram. I also will leave my link to my profile in the description box below if you find that easier to sort of click on it and go follow. So some of the misconceptions I know about. Now, one of the misconceptions that I was always thought about PTSD was that PTSD was a war veterans condition, and it was something that happened when you experienced a traumatic event while serving in the war, and then you had these symptoms. But actually, I've never been in the army. I've never gone to war. I've never done any of that sort of bits and pieces, but I still struggled. And I think that's one of the things that I was always brought up knowing that, it was a war veterans condition. It was, yeah, and it's not. It's not that. It's not to do with war veterans. I mean, yes, it can be. And yes, war veterans can come back and have PTSD, but it also can affect other people. And I think that's important to remember. That another thing about PTSD that I kind of came across a lot with my friends especially was the thought that PTSD is always there, and how to kind of just talk about it without affecting the other person and causing them to then have flashbacks or causing them to kind of have, a worse experience for that day. Well, what I would say is it depends on the person. It really, really does. It depends on the person, depends where they are in their recovery. But PTSD generally is something that happens kind of in little spurts, in my experience at least. So I might wake up in the morning and I'll feel okay. I might go out and I'll see someone who looks like my abuser, and then it will affect me for the rest of the day. But I might go out the next day and be absolutely fine. It kind of just depends on the person. And I think just knowing that person and knowing their triggers and knowing how they present when they have had a trigger to their PTSD, I think is very important in friendships. So that's it for today's video. I'm assuming once I have edited everything, it is probably going to be on the longer side for the video, but I hope you've learned something. And again, if you would like to follow or like the playlist that I have on my YouTube channel. It is called the What Is series. I will leave it again on the card up on top of the screen, as well along with like my sexual abuse story, which is not in that playlist because it's not a informational thing, but I will leave it on the card above as well. So you can either click on, you know, the whole What Is series, or you can find out more about my particular experience being sexually abused. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next one.